Well, good morning again. Let me ask you a question today. What would you do if you were rich? I mean, come on, we've all thought about it. Like, there's that thing that we would like to buy, that place that we would like to go, that thing that we would like to do. We've all dreamed about what would I do if I was rich. And most likely today, when you start thinking about what would I do if I was rich, most of our thoughts center around us, like things that we would do for us. And today, that doesn't make us bad, it just makes us human. Now, most of us have probably considered or said at one time or the other that if I was rich, if I had the means, I would contribute significantly to this cause. I would eliminate this problem. I would take care of this family or this person. We've dreamed about things that we would like to do, generous, charitable things we would like to do if we ever had the means. The unfortunate reality today is that we are not rich, or at least we do not consider ourselves to be rich. But today, just in case we ever find ourselves in the enviable position of being rich, the Bible has a lot to say about what we should do with our riches. You see, rich is a tricky word to define. Recently, the researchers at Gallup did a study across a wide range of Americans in different socioeconomic backgrounds and positions. And what they found is that people that in the median $30,000 a year income bracket considered rich to be those that made $60,000 a year. Those in the $50,000 a year income bracket considered rich those that made $100,000 a year. Not surprisingly, those in the $100,000 a year income bracket considered those that made approximately $200,000 a year rich. Basically, across the survey, nobody was rich, but everybody that made approximately double what they made was considered to be rich. Similarly, Money Magazine, which I'm assuming people that subscribe to Money Magazine do so because they have money, but anyway, Money Magazine did a research poll of their subscribers about how they would define rich. And the subscribers of Money Magazine defined rich as those having approximately $5 million in liquid assets. I would have no problem considering that to be rich. I don't know about you. So basically, all of this teaches us that rich is a moving target, that it's hard to define what it means to really be rich. Really, one way to say it is nobody is rich, but we all know somebody that is. I mean, none of us would consider ourselves to be rich, but we know somebody that makes more than we do. Somebody has a bigger house than we do. Somebody that drives nicer cars than we do. And they're rich. We're not rich, but they're rich because they have more than what we have. So this morning, I want to attempt to define rich just for the sake of our conversation this morning. And I want to define it this way. Rich is having more than you need. Rich is having more than you need. Because if you zoom out and evaluate our lives from a world perspective, we're rich. Because we are people that by and large have more than what we need. Now, you and I this morning, we don't consider ourselves rich because we don't feel rich. And we don't feel rich because we don't have everything that we want. And we don't feel rich because we have problems, right? I mean, we all have problems. But in reality, most of our problems are rich people problems. I mean, we've got a day where we have bad cell phone reception. And we're like, oh my gosh, it's kind of a rich people problem. We show up at a place that doesn't have Wi-Fi. Or if the Wi-Fi is slow, we get our panties in a wad. But those are rich people problems. We're having a hard time deciding where we're going to go on vacation. Those are rich people problems. Our car breaks down or starts having trouble. And that can be frustrating, but that's a rich people problem. Our Amazon order doesn't offer 2-day shipping. And we're like, oh my gosh, what is this world coming to? Those are rich people problems. The waiter got our order wrong or it came late at the restaurant. Rich people problems. This morning, we don't think we're rich because we don't feel rich, and we don't feel rich because we don't have everything that we want. But in reality, we are rich because we have everything that we need. I was reading a book this week, and in it was a story of Bill Gates. And Bill and Melinda Gates are obviously just astronomically mind-blowing rich, but they are also incredibly generous people. The Bill Gates Foundation gives away billions of dollars. Wouldn't you like to be able to give away billions of dollars? That must have a nice feeling to it. But Bill and Melinda Gates are incredibly generous people, and as part of their foundation, they were traveling to just an incredibly poor region of India and going in and out of the villages, visiting with people, hearing their stories, finding out the daily struggle they face as far as food and water and, just what it was like to be poor in that region. And Bill Gates was visiting with this very elderly Indian woman, and after he left her hut, the reporter asked this woman, how she felt about having one of the richest people in the world in her home. And her response is kind of astonishing. She said, you all are from America. You're all rich. To her, it made no difference whether it was Bill Gates or any average American scrub like you and I. In the context of the world, we are rich because most of our problems deal with things that we want, not necessarily things that we need. Consider this today, that if you make $40,000 a year, you're in the top 4% of income earners in the world. If you make $48,000 a year, you are in the top 1% of income earners in the world. I mean, you are a 1%er. I mean, you're one of those. You are the elitist snobs that everybody's always going on and on about on political talk radio and TV. You are a 1%er if you make $48,000 a year. You're rich. Now, nobody got up and did a happy dance at that revelation today. And again, we don't consider ourselves rich because we don't feel rich, because we don't have everything we want. We got problems, but the truth is we are rich. We lived in the richest times of the richest nation of the world. We're rich. We're blessed. You see, we're like, oh yeah, we're blessed. We like that term, #blessed. We like that term better, but in reality today, we are rich. And unfortunately, the evidence is overwhelming that we're not very good at being rich. Sports Illustrated came out with a story a couple years ago, and in their research, they had found that 78% of NFL players were bankrupt or financially distressed within 2 years of retirement. Now, if you're a sports fan, you've seen some of the contracts that these people sign, and you thought, if I could have a game check. I mean, when you're making millions of dollars and you play 16 games, just the check for a game would be like, I'd be good for a long time just with one of these checks. But the vast majority of them, even though they are rich, they're not very good at being rich. 60% of NBA players are broke within 5 years of walking off the court. And most of us have thought, if I could just make a piece of that kind of money, I'd be good for a long time. Studies have shown that lottery winners are typically broke within 5 years of hitting it big because we're not very good at being rich. Not only as rich people are we not really very good at keeping our money, we're not very good at giving our money either. Studies have shown that people in the median income bracket in America, which is approximately $50,000 a year, give on average about 6% of their income to charitable causes. But if you jump up into the $200,000 income bracket, those people give only 4% of their income to charitable causes. And the higher you go up the income ladder, the lower the percentage of charitable giving becomes. We're not very good at being rich. But the Bible gives us some instruction as rich people, how we should handle ourselves in being rich. And even beyond that, the Word of God gives us insight as far as people who have more than enough, what God expects us to do with our more than enough. And this morning we're going to look at a parable that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 12 that will teach us how we should live as rich people. So Jesus, in verse 13 of Luke chapter 12, it says, someone in the crowd, Jesus is speaking, this guy interrupts. He says, teacher, tell my brother to divide an inheritance with me. So now here are two rich guys. They've got more than enough. They've got this extra money that they've got to figure out what they're going to do with. Jesus replied, man, who appointed me as a judge or an arbiter between you? Like, what's that have to do with me? But then Jesus seizes on the opportunity. And he says, speaking to the crowd, he says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. So Jesus begins to teach that we've got to be intentional in our attitude, intentional in how we handle money in order to protect our own hearts. And then he drops this life-defining statement, if we will receive it as truth, that life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. So Jesus here is speaking to our attitude toward money and stuff. And he gives us encouragement on how we can face the daily battle that you and I face in living in a culture whose economic engine is built on creating dissatisfaction and discontentment with what we already have. Every day, you and I are bombarded with messages on the TV, on the radio, all around us, in print, in visual, in digital, of people trying to sell us a product, but what they're ultimately trying to sell us is happiness. The message is, your life is incomplete. You are missing out on something because you do not have whatever widget, gadget, or thing that we are offering. That we know you have a house, but you're missing out because you don't have this house, or your house doesn't have this, home light, total home automation. Basically, you walk in and your whole house begins to move and shape and, cater to your comforts. You have a car, but your car is a piece of junk. You need this car. You need this experience. You need these clothes, this look, this thing. And everything is built on creating dissatisfaction in our lives. So we're daily faced, really beyond daily, moment by moment, faced with the decision, are we going to lean into the message of our culture, or are we going to lean into the wisdom of Jesus, that happiness, the satisfaction, the fulfillment cannot be attained through stuff, through the experiences of this world? And then Jesus begins to teach a parable. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So here is a man who has rich people problems. He has more than enough. So he's got to begin to wrestle with the question, what am I going to do with my more than enough? Verse 17, he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. I've got more than enough. I've got to decide what I'm going to do with my more than enough. Just like you and I have to decide, what are we going to do with our more than enough? There's a question that, to be faithful as followers of Jesus, you and I need to wrestle with an ongoing basis. And the question is, how much is enough? How much is enough? As rich people who by and large have more than what we need, what are we going to do with our more than enough? The American oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller, one of the most famous and successful businessmen of the early 1900s, was asked in an interview one time, Mr. Rockefeller, how much is enough? To which he infamously replied, just one more dollar. Just one more dollar. To a man who had more money than what most people in that day could even imagine, it still was not enough. And is that not the American way? What's it going to take to be satisfied? Well, if I can just get that promotion, if I can just get one more raise, if I can just buy that house or get that car or have that experience, then I'll be happy. Then I will be satisfied. But there's always something something else that has our attention, that has created some allure, that is drawing us in that direction. And that's the challenge that thank you. See, how awesome is that? Sunday delivery, is that not one of the greatest inventions of our day and age? We just love stuff, right? We are all about the stuff. So he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store all of my crops. And this is the question we got to wrestle with. How much is enough? Verse 18, then he said, so I've got a solution now. This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. This is America. I want more stuff. We are people of more stuff. We got all kinds of stuff. We got stuff for our stuff. We got so much stuff, we have to buy stuff so that we can store our stuff. How many of you have a garage? Like some people are like, I'm not raising my hand for anything in this entire matter. How many of you have a garage? Come on, let's be honest today. God will smite you for lying in the house of God. Come on. How many of you have a garage? How many of you park your car in your garage? Yeah, not nearly as many hands. I read this fascinating thing this week in a story that garages were originally designed. Guess what? You'll never believe this. Garages were originally designed to park your car in. They were originally designed to be like miniature houses for your car. And isn't it crazy? So many of us, we have garages, but they're not miniature houses for our car. They're miniature houses for our stuff. We got so much stuff that we can't even fit our stuff in our house. How many of you have one of those closets in your house that it's like enter at your own risk? You're like, it's like, well, where are we going to put this? Let's just put it in the hallway closet. No! Do not because you open the door, you don't know what's going to come out. It may be like stepping back into time. Like things from the 70s are going to come cascading out of that closet. Occasionally my wife, man, she gets into like purging mode. We got 3 young children, so it's like everywhere you go, there's a gadget, there's a toy, there's like some cheap piece of junk from Malaysia or China or somewhere in Southeast Asia, they got to have, so they bring it home, and it's like just more stuff. So we go into purge mode. Isn't it crazy? You start purging, and you're like, man, we're going to throw away everything that's in that box. And you're like, oh my gosh, you open the box, and you're like, where did that come from? Like that. You pull stuff out, and it's still got the tags on it. You're like, oops, it's like Christmas. It's like, when did we buy that? And the wife is like, I think we bought that about 7 years ago. And you're like, oh my gosh, because we get into a store and we're like, we convince ourselves that life literally will not go on if we do not buy this. We walk into a store to this revelation of like, I don't know how I have existed up to this point without this thing. And what do? We buy it and we take it home. And it winds up in a box, in a closet that we never open because we're afraid to go in there. We love stuff. We're like the man. It's like, I got so much stuff. So, we got so much stuff. So we're like, we need a bigger house for all this stuff. So we go buy a bigger house to house all of the stuff that we don't even really know that we have, stuff that we don't use and stuff that we don't even know what it is, what it does, or even where it's at. We just know that we have it. So we go buy a bigger house, all that stuff, and then what happens? We're like, man, we don't have enough stuff in this house. So we have to go buy new stuff. Or we get in there and we're like, this furniture just doesn't work in this house. So we have to get rid of that and go buy more furniture or the bedroom suite, or we get into the house and we like it for a while and we're like, man, this kitchen just isn't working for me. So, we got to remodel the kitchen. We got to change something. We are fascinated with stuff. Newer, bigger, better, faster, cooler. We just love stuff. But the question we got to wrestle with is, how much is enough? How much stuff do we really need? And as people who have more than enough, what does God expect us to do with our more than enough? In verse 19, I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. I've got so much stuff now that surely I'll be happy. Surely I'll be satisfied. And some of us have been there. We pursued that thing that car, that house, that experience, that vacation, and surely we'll be happy. I mean, we climbed the hill thinking, man, that if I can just get there, I'll be happy. And we got to the hill, and what happened? There was another hill with cooler stuff, bigger houses, nicer cars, and all of a sudden, we thought we'd be happy on this hill, but we're looking up the hill thinking, if I can just get to that hill, then I can take it easy. I can relax. I can be happy. I mean, that's the American dream, right? If we can just get enough stuff, then we'll be satisfied. Then we'll be happy. Last week, we talked about evaluating our lives, our money, our talents, our time, to determine whether or not they were orbiting around self, whether everything in our life existed for our own comfort, our own pleasure, or whether it had all been surrendered to God, and everything in our life ultimately orbited around the center of the true universe, which is our Creator God. And here in this story, we find a man who most definitely his life revolved around self. So what does he do? I've got so much stuff that I'm going to build a bigger barn to make room for my stuff. Verse 20, but God said to him, you fool. So according to Jesus, those who falsely assume that everything in their life exists to serve them, their comfort, their pleasure, their desires, God sees them as a fool. And all throughout the book of Proverbs, we read that the end of the fool is never good. That the path of the fool never winds up in a destination that any of us would ever intentionally set out for. You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. So as rich people that have more than enough, we need to ask the question, what does God expect us to do with our more than enough? And according to Jesus, those who assume that their more than enough exists for their own comfort and their own pleasure is a fool and will pay a fool's price. But rather, God expects us to take our more than enough and be rich toward God, which all richness toward God, who doesn't need anything that we have, is always distributed to people that do. So what if, instead of spending more on ourselves, we instead learn to share more with others, like our parents tried to teach us when we were 3? What if, you're taking notes today, write this in, when you have more than enough, don't build a bigger barn, build a bigger table. Instead of assuming that everything I have is mine and exists to serve my pleasure and constantly trying to find a space to store more and more stuff, what if instead of building bigger barns, built a bigger table? Instead of hoarding everything for ourselves, we learned to give to those that really do need. You see, today, the quickest way to waste our lives, the quickest route to an incredibly small world, is to keep building bigger barns. Bigger barn builders have one purpose in mind. Me, self, my stuff, my pleasure, my needs, and they exist in a very small world. But those who forego building bigger barns and instead build bigger tables actually have the opportunity to impact real people in their time and space. Is that not ultimately what we are all after? We want to live lives that truly make a difference. Bigger barn builders only impact one life, and that is themselves. But people who build bigger tables impact the world. So as rich people, people who have more than enough, what does God want us to do with our more than enough? God doesn't want us to build bigger table or bigger barns. He wants us to build bigger tables. Studies show us that the generosity of Christians outpaces the general population in America, but not by much. I believe Christians should be the most generous people in the world because we are being shaped in the image of a generous God. Only 9% of born-again Christians tithe. The average giving of American Christians is 2.58% of income, down from 3.3% during the Depression era. So as we have gotten richer, we have given less. As we have gotten richer, we have built bigger barns, but smaller tables. Of the money that American churches receive, only 2% is contributed to global mission causes. So of American Christian wealth, only 2% of 2% goes to the areas of the world in the greatest need. We give on average 6 cents a day to global mission causes. So what are we doing with our more than enough? Well, we're spending on average $341 billion on entertainment. We're spending on average $220 billion on clothing. American teenagers alone spent $264 billion last year. We're spending on average $65 billion on jewelry, $31 billion on pets. Does Frodo really need a sweater? Come on now. Somebody said yes, and apparently so. PetSmart thinks so. We're spending $58 billion on lottery tickets. That's what we're doing with our more than enough. That's what our bigger barns are going to serve. But the question that we need to ask is, what should we be doing with our more than enough? Let's watch this quick video.
I'd like to talk about the laws of man here in this city, where those laws are written. And I'd like to talk about higher laws. It would be great to assume that one serves the other, that the laws of man serve these higher laws, but of course they don't always. And I presume that, in a way, is why you're all here. It's not a coincidence that in the scriptures, poverty is mentioned more than 2,100 times. It's not an accident. It's a lot of airtime. As you have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. As I say, good news to the poor. God may well be with us in our mansions on the hill. I hope so. He may well be with us in all manner of controversial stuff. Maybe, maybe not. But the one thing we can all agree, all faiths, all ideologies, is that God is with the vulnerable and the poor. God is in the slums, in the cardboard boxes where the poor play house. God is in the silence of a mother who has infected her child with a virus that will end both their lives. God is in the cries heard under the rubble of war. God is in the debris of wasted opportunity and lives. And God is with us if we are with them. A number of years ago, I met a wise man who changed my life in countless ways, big and small. I was always seeking the Lord's blessing. I'd be saying, look, I've got a new song. Would you look after? I have a family. I'm going away on tour. Please look after them. And this wise man asked me to stop. He said, stop asking God to bless what you're doing. Get involved in what God is doing, because it's already blessed.
taking notes this morning, write that down. Get involved with what God is doing, because it is already blessed. When we answer the question, what do we do with our more than enough, I would dare say we get involved with what God is doing. If we truly want to experience the blessing of God, if we truly want to know joy and fulfillment, we know from the words of Jesus that it's not found in bigger barns, but it can be found in getting involved with what God is already doing. Studies have shown us that over 1 billion people on our planet live on less than $2 a day. It's been estimated that approximately $68 billion would be needed to lift the poorest of the poor out of poverty, to lift those 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. Consider this. In 2016 alone, American teenagers spent $63 billion just on food. Ours is not a problem of lack of resources. Our problem is that our barns have gotten bigger and our tables have gotten smaller. We need to start imagining what if. What if studies have been done that have shown that if all American Christian households tithe, contributed 10% of their income to the church, to Christian organizations, it would add an additional $168 billion to the table. Consider this. It's been estimated again to eliminate extreme poverty, we would need $68 billion. To provide universal primary education would require $6 billion. To provide clean drinking water to all of the people in the world would require $9 billion. To provide universal basic health care and nutrition would require $13 billion. Altogether less than the $168 billion that would be available if God's people would order their financial world around biblical principles. Can you imagine today how the perception of Christians in this world would change if through our generosity we brought an end to world hunger? If through the generosity of the people of God we solved the global clean drinking water crisis? If through the generosity of God's church we were able to provide universal access to drugs for malaria, for tuberculosis, for AIDS? If through the generosity of the people of God we were to eliminate the more than 26,000 children who die every day due to malnutrition? If through the generosity of the people of God we guaranteed education for all of the world's children, and we provided a safety net to the tens of millions of orphans, I would dare say the perception of Christians would change radically through such a demonstration of generosity. We're rich. God expects us to be responsible, to be good stewards of our riches. Today, the reality is that we all have different levels of need. Depending on our season of life, if you're single, your level of need may not be as much as somebody that's married with children. Depending on our background, depending on our aspirations, we all have different levels of need. And some of our needs are greater than others. But today, because we're rich, we have more than we need. And ultimately, what we've got to wrestle with is, what do we do with our more than enough? Do we build bigger barns so that we can contain more and more of our more than enough? Storing it, hoarding it, using it all for ourselves? Or do we instead build a bigger table so that we can give more, so that we can share more, so that we can bless others more? According to Jesus, he favors this over this. Listen today, none of this is to condemn anybody, emotionally manipulate anybody. My family, we're wrestling with this question right now. We have a legitimate need. We own and operate a lawn and landscape business that has grown. We're currently we have 4 trailers in addition to some work trucks, and we live in a cul-de-sac. And we are not very popular in our cul-de-sac because of our constant flow of traffic and stuff. So we're in the process of trying to buy land. I've got 3 trailers parked at a friend's business. We've got a storage building that we shuffle stuff in and out of. We have a legitimate need, but with that need comes the wrestling of how much house are we going to buy? We live in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, which is enough for our family. But we've got 3 children that are growing. We would love for them to all have their own bedroom. At this point, I would love for them to all have their own bathroom so that I can have access to a bathroom on occasion when needed. Again, that's a want at this point. If we had land, I could probably just go outside. I was raised in the country. If you judge me, that's your own problem. But we need land to build a shop to accommodate a need, but we're wrestling with the other part of how much is enough. And not to be self-congratulatory, but just to encourage you on this, one of the things that we are not going to do is buy the house that we can afford. You see, that's America. How much can I afford? How much payment can you afford? And because we keep buying what we can afford, we keep building bigger barns, and we keep going more and more in debt. So we're not trying to approach it from a standpoint of what can we afford, but what do we need? How much is enough? Because one thing we're committed to is maintaining margin in our finances, and we're going to talk about that next week. So none of this is to condemn anybody, to make anybody feel bad, to make anybody feel guilty about a little bit of pleasure in life. In a couple of weeks, I'm taking my wife to Mexico. That's her reward for putting up with me for 15 years. She deserves it, and everybody can say amen. So it's not that pleasure, it's not that fun is bad, but we've got to wrestle with the question, how much is enough? Because in God's eyes, if we have an endless campaign of building bigger barns, we cannot be pleasing to God when He desires bigger tables. Let me close with some encouragement from the Apostle Paul. Speaking on this subject of generosity, remember this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. But whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Verse 7, each of you should give as you've decided in your hearts. Again, we're not here to manipulate, to twist anybody's emotions to get you to do something you don't want to do. This is a heart issue between you and God. But listen to verse 8. And God is able to bless you abundantly. We're all down for that. But not so you can build a bigger barn, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you can instead abound in every good work. You can be generous. You can build a bigger table. Verse 10, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed, not so you can build a bigger barn. Increase your store of seed and enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way, not for yourself, so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. Listen to verse 12. This service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of God's people, not only will you become a tangible blessing to people, but it also overflows in many expressions of thanks to God. And is that not what we talk about all the time around here at Genesis? Our God design, honor God, bless others, and in that we find fulfillment. That's where we find the joy of God. And Paul says it's in embracing a generous lifestyle, refusing to be a perpetual barn builder, but instead becoming a lavish table spreader. Blessing to people, honor God, joy and fulfillment to us. We're rich. We don't feel rich. We don't think we're rich because we don't have everything we want, but we're rich because we have more than we need. The question becomes, what do I do with my more than enough? Do I build bigger barns or do I set a bigger table? Let's pray. Father, we love you today.